next slide. And also the meeting is being recorded. So we're going to send that to all the folks who registered for today. And if you also want to revisit anything that we talked about, we have a lot of great information for you all. We're going to be sharing the slides and everything too afterwards, any resources that we present, so you can revisit all of that too. So again, welcome to our first ever California DREAM Act deep dive. This is a session that's specific to high school counselors and community-based organizations who serve undocumented students. But I know we're also joined by a lot of other colleges and universities. So welcome to all those who are joining us today. We just finished a big boot camp for all of our colleges and universities last week. We also got like a lot of requests from high schools to join that training. So we're doing this special session today for you all to share some information. It's going to be helpful for high schools to also know in supporting students with the California DREAM Act. So we'll go to our next slide too, and we'll do some quick introductions of who is facilitating the training for you all today. My name is Madeline Villanueva, she, her pronouns. I'm the Catalyst Fund Specialist with Immigrants Rising. So work with a lot of different colleges and universities across the state to support them in their undocumented student services. I also am a current DACA recipient, and so went through my undergrad as an undocumented student and was a beneficiary of California DREAM Act. And I think maybe we could do some quick introductions of my co-hosts right now too. So Nancy, could you do a quick introduction?
Hi everyone, so excited that you're here. My name is Nancy Jeditis. I'm the Director of Higher Education at Immigrants Rising, and I was a financial aid counselor for about 8 or 9 years. It wasn't actually my choice to become a financial aid counselor, but it has helped me so much in terms of being able to better support undocumented students. I was responsible for implementing the California DREAM Act at San Francisco State when it first came through, and have also created a lot of educational resource materials to support students, financial aid counselors, and educators in being able to increase application award rates. And I'm really excited to be here with 2 of my colleagues.
Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Rocio Preciado, and I'm the Leadership and Partnerships Manager here at Immigrants Rising. I graduated from UC Santa Cruz. I was formerly undocumented, and I had the opportunity to legalize my status thanks to the U visa, an immigration option that was available, and I did not know was available to me. I've been with Immigrants Rising since 2013, and part of my role in the past has been to work very closely with high schools across the Bay Area and oftentimes across California in supporting a lot of the work that is happening and supporting high schools develop some of those resources. Currently, a lot of my work is focused on really supporting the leadership development of other undocumented young people who are currently attending college. And I'm super excited to be here and share some more information with you all.
Good to see you. Uni, do you want to do a quick intro too?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Uni. I am the Technology Support Specialist here at Immigrants Rising. Been with them for 2 years now, and really happy to be here supporting you all today with the Zoom. And I'm also very happy to see my high school represented here. I went to Hamilton High School and graduated in 2016, if anyone's paying attention. I'll pass it back to Nancy or Madeline.
Yeah, thank you so much, Uni. That's great to hear that your high school is also part of this call. So again, any of those folks, if you do have any questions at all that you don't want to put in the bigger chat, feel free to message any of us throughout the training. Obviously not the person who is speaking at the time, and that person can support you with your question. So we'll go to our next slide too. And as we also introduce ourselves, feel free to continually introduce yourself in the chat too. I see a lot of folks have already done that, so we can get a sense of who is joining us in the room. So again, your name, your position, and your campus or organization if you have not already done so. I see like we have a couple of high schools who've already introduced themselves in the chat. See a lot. I was also from LAUSD, so I think I see some LAUSD representation in the chat. So that's great to hear. And yeah, so keep doing that as we go along. And I'll have us go to our next slide to share some of our goals for today. And so it is a pretty long training, but we have a lot of great information planned for you all. Again, everything's being recorded, so feel free to revisit this, or if you need to, step away for really quickly, do that too. But we are just wrapping up some of our welcome today. We're going to be starting with just creating a common understanding so folks are able to be on the same page as we're going through the training today. In-state tuition, or AB540, SB68 is a requirement of the California DREAM Act, so we're going to be doing a refresher of that, sharing some current statistics about application rates for the DREAM Act, and just some practices on how to successfully navigate it for students and for educators who are supporting them. Then we're going to do a short break, hopefully by 11, but we'll see where we're at with the time. And then we're going to be sharing some resources to support your work, doing some Q&A and breakout rooms in the end for some reflections and some reflections and some questions if there is any. And then we have an evaluation, and then we're going to be closing the room with some next steps too, to leave you all with. And so our goals for today are actually to just help you folks kind of get equipped with the specific languages and messaging that increases students' comfort and participation with the California DREAM Act. We all know that undocumented students may not be as willing to pursue resources because there's a lot of fear with the status. And so how do we make sure that students know that this is a safe thing for them to apply to, and that they're able to get access to financial aid regardless of their immigration status here in California. And then we're going to be sharing some key resources and helpful information in some of the outreach that you all do to students around financial aid, including through emails or any outreach materials and websites if that is available to you all. And then we'll share some practices that can increase the ability of eligible students to get financial aid easier for them too. And then, so before we get started with everything, I do also want to get a sense of where folks in the room are at when it comes to their knowledge and I guess kind of like work with the California DREAM Act. So we are going to be doing this quick pre-assessment, and it is anonymous. So answer as truthfully as you can. We're going to be doing this on Mentimeter. And so I'm going to ask folks to go on menti.com. You could do that either through a web browser, or if you have your phone. I'm going to ask you for this code right here that's on the screen, and I'll have Uni throw that in the chat for us, but it's 6570-6105. And then you're going to basically rate yourself in these 3 questions that we have up on screen. And I think it's like disagree to agree. And you can place yourself anywhere in that spectrum. So I'm going to give folks a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll pull up to see where we're at. And thank you for all of those who's also introducing themselves in the chat. Okay, so it looks like we have about 26 people who participated so far. I'll wait to see if we can get a little bit more. Okay, so we're up to 31. It looks like for the most part, we're a little bit higher along in the room with the language and messaging that increases students' comfort and participation with the California DREAM Act. So that's really great to see. And then we're a little bit, we went a little bit higher, but folks are aware, around 2.9, aware and utilize resources to expand awareness. And then we're also a little bit in the midpoint around strategies to increase student comfort in completing all the steps. Okay, so it looks like for sure, definitely some knowledge in the room, right, about how to ensure students are aware of and applying and completing their California DREAM Act. So hopefully we can hear some of that from you all as we go through the training, but we will be sharing a lot more resources and strategies too on how to maybe get us a little bit closer to the strongly agree side of the spectrum here. But it looks like there is still a lot of, we're a little bit higher too on the language and messaging that increases students' comfort and participation. So hopefully folks can also share that as we go. But I think maybe before we move on, is there anybody who would like to maybe share a little bit about why they voted the way that they voted in any of the statements in the slide for you all. And you could feel free to put that in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and verbally say something. Yeah, any volunteers to share why they voted the way they did in the slide? Any promising practice you want to just quickly get us going with today? Okay, if not yet, maybe we still need to get a little bit warmed up. That is completely okay. So we could just move on. And then again, we encourage folks to like share throughout too. We're going to be doing a lot of sharing, so we also want to hear from you all on what you are doing on your campus or organization. And so I'm going to move us on to our first part, and this is going to be facilitated by Rocio. So I'm going to turn it over to her.
Okay, thank you, Madeline. Thank you everyone for participating in that. So as part of, just before we dive in and we get started, we definitely want to create a common understanding. I know that we probably have some folks that are new, that maybe this is the first time that you're joining one of our trainings, or you might have joined one of our trainings in the past and maybe it was a while back. So let's just do a quick refresher as to who it is that we're speaking about when we're referring to undocumented students. And so we are referring to multiple populations. Okay, so it does get more complicated than that. So we may be referring to students who probably entered without inspection. So let's say, for example, that was my case. I came to the US and I entered without inspection, and therefore I was undocumented here in the US without legal status, without any work authorization. There are other folks who maybe entered with legal status, but they overstayed. So these are usually instances where a student might come into the US, they have maybe a student visa, or they might have a visitor visa, and they overstayed that visa and are then undocumented, and they lose that status. And then we also have folks who are also undocumented and have deferred action for childhood arrival. So these are folks who were eligible for DACA, also known as DACA. Folks who came in to the US under as children, who were here from 2012 up until now, and now have a work authorization and protection from deportation. And then we also have folks who are probably in the pathway of legalizing their status. So if you think of maybe a student who came into the US and applied for political asylum and maybe currently has a case pending. So these are some of the instances where you might see a student that might currently be in the process of legalizing their status and might still be identified as undocumented. And then we also have folks who are vulnerable immigrants. So also realizing that not every undocumented student's experience is the same. There are students who, and not just to provide an example, there are students who probably do not have the care of their parents, or students who might probably be neglected, or young kids who maybe have been trafficked. So when we think about vulnerable immigrants, really keeping in mind, and this is a component where you all as a school can get to assess, where is the student situation at, and are you all working with immigrant population that might be part of a vulnerable community or from a vulnerable group of folks. So this is a quick overview of just undocumented. I know that there might be some questions coming in. Yeah, so what if they are changing the status from visa from B to F1? So those are folks who would still be, if they're just transferring their visa, those are folks who might still have some legal presence. But the moment that someone loses that visa or overstays that visa, or is not longer following through with the expectations of or using that visa as required, they might lose that status, that visa status, and then become undocumented here in the US. Then the next slide. Now, here are some stats. For 17 years, we thought that 65,000 students were graduating from high school without legal status. And so now with new data that has come out, it turns out that 98,000 of students without legal status are graduating every year nationwide. And currently the number of students that are graduating high school currently do not have access to DACA. So what does that mean? That students are currently with the uncertainty of whether they're going to be able to work and find some sort of employment once they graduate college, if they do decide to go to college. Now, it's important to note that almost 1/3 of those students live in California, which means that we do have a high representation of undocumented folks here in the US, here in California. Now, just to get more specific on the slide, so in California, we do have 3,059,000, approximately 3,059,000 undocumented folks in the US, and this is from the census data that was that came out that was done between 2012 and 2016, and out of those 3 million folks, the ages range between 16 and 24, and between that age range, we have approximately 400,000 of those students between that age range, which is usually the age range of students who are either about to graduate college or are entering into some sort of higher ed education or are currently already in some workforce. And only 92% of that population is currently enrolled in college. And only 21.6% of college-age undocumented youth are currently attending college in California. Now, we're going to get into recognizing diversity, because this is an important point that really speaks to the way that we tailor our resources and where is it that we tailor our resources. So, there was a research that was conducted by UCLA in 2015 that really does outline that we do have a diversity of undocumented folks from all over the world. So we're going to get into the breakdown. And so as we can see, the second largest population by race after folks who identified as Hispanic is the API community. As you see in the chat, it's also important to recognize that we also do have the demographics of undocumented Black folks who are also undocumented here in the US, folks who are also identified as white who are also undocumented. And so I do also like to point out that the diversity also varies, although it stays pretty consistent in the highest to the lowest percentage. It is important to recognize that we do have a lot of folks who are undocumented who are currently not DACA eligible and don't have an immigration status, while also there is a representation of folks who do have who is also diverse within the DACA eligible student population. So it's also important to note that that diversity of folks who are non-Latinx, who might not identify as Latinx, it's also increasing amongst the community members that are currently undocumented without DACA. So just some things to keep in mind, since it does influence and does play a role in how it is that we send our messaging when we're speaking about college access, when we're speaking about access to state financial aid, and also where it is that we're delivering some of this information, whether it's in the classroom or whether it's in some of the centers. So there's just some food for thought live with you all, and hopefully this can help you think about how can you provide some of this information and make it more accessible depending on the population and really the demographics and the diversity that currently exist. Now, when we're speaking about diversity, there's also the different pathways that folks choose. So as some of you may know, there are multiple pathways to college, and I would like to point out that most high school students that are undocumented opt or choose to go the community college route. And many times this has nothing to do with whether they were accepted or they were not accepted to a four-year university, but many times it comes because of the idea and the assumption that community college is the only option and the only route because they're undocumented. We also have folks that go to the four-year university who are able to make it through college as they have access to a lot of the information and the right information that they need. And then there's also students that are still trying to identify, who maybe are just recently arrivals, who are still trying to navigate the US education system, that go to the adult school route, and they still have an option and opportunity, and there are ways in which they can then make their way to a community college and then attend a four-year university. So one of the reasons why we really like to highlight this visual here is that there are multiple ways in which someone can access higher education. It is very common for undocumented folks to go to the community college route due to lack of information, not because they are not eligible. And also highlighting that adult schools and non-credit schools are starting to play a really critical role in ensuring that students who recently met or who are in the pathway of meeting AB540 eligibility can still make their way to college.
Thank you so much, Rocio. I think that that kind of grounding is just really important, making sure that we are thinking about the diversity of the way in which students enter higher education. Madeline made the great point also that we also need to be thinking about how undocumented students are entering into graduate school. But we know that a lot of you or all of you are here today to really be thinking about the California DREAM Act application and how to increase award rates for the California DREAM Act. And the reason that we give you that grounding is just thinking about, we want to make sure that you're not just talking to one portion of the room. And in terms of thinking about what's going on with the California DREAM Act, this is a research that was done in 2018 and 2019, but it's just so impactful that I bring it up. It came out in a meeting in the California Student Aid Commission. Thinking of those 92,000 individuals that Rocio was talking about in California, actually only 52,000 in 2018 and 19 actually applied for the California DREAM Act. So 40% of undocumented students who were enrolled in higher education didn't even apply. And then from that, looking at California Cal Grant awards, not Promise Grants, CSU grants, or UC grants, but the Cal Grant awards, which is an entitlement grant. Of the 52,000 who applied, only 22,000 were eligible and offered the grant. And we'll be talking a little bit about like what's going on with this funnel, right? But then within that, only 16,000 actually got their Cal Grant in their hands. So we're going from 92,000 all the way down to 16,000, which is really dramatic. And that's why all of us I know are super committed to making sure that more students apply and that those who apply get all financial aid for which they are eligible. So this was from 2018 and 2019, but we'll see in these past couple of years, especially during the pandemic, those numbers have been reduced even more. So you'll see that on FAFSA, the kind of teal greenish one is for 2020 and the dark blue is 2021. You'll see that there were some drops in 20 and 21 for the FAFSAs, but dramatic drops for the California DREAM Act application awards. They went down 4% in 2020, but negative 16% in 2021. And my understanding from California Student Aid Commission is that these numbers are actually on par again. So if we're talking 92,000 to 52,000, then it's that much less that have actually applied again our work today is really cut out ahead of us. And so I'm super grateful that all of you are here thinking about the areas that we can commit to be able to increase these application rates and then actually increase the award rates that are given. Many of you probably already know, due to some of this problems with students being able to get the information and access and the digital divide, the California Student Aid Commission did actually postpone their application for the Cal Grants and to be considered for Cal Grants and other CSAC aid to April 1st. So that's tomorrow. And so I'm sure all of you have been super busy trying to pull all of those pieces together, spread the information far and wide, and then make sure that students know that they can still apply. The GPA verification was not included in that. So GPA verifications did need to be submitted by March 2nd, but there is a GPA late review form if there's a reason that a student specifically couldn't do it. And that's on the CSAC website. We'll be sharing with you later in the presentation. So I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Madeline, because we want to just talk quickly again about AB540, because one of the reasons that a lot of students don't actually get their Cal Grant aid is because they don't have their affidavit on file. So we want to make sure that everybody knows about the areas that are available. And also we are working at Immigrants Rising to be able to increase the equitable implementation of AB540 to make sure that a student can go to any school and get the same information based on the law. And so you can email me if you have more questions about that, but I'm going to pass it to Madeline right now.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. And so I'm also seeing this in the chat, right? Also really, and I think this is a constant thing, like we hear from the students and the educators we work with, that AB540 and California DREAM Act are completely different things. And you need AB540 in order to qualify for the California DREAM Act. And so I'm sure, as we all know here, AB540 or in-state tuition in California has been expanding to include more and more students and more pathways. And so that's been really beneficial for our undocumented students who go through these different schools in order to go through these different schools in their pursuit of higher education. And so it started off with AB540 in 2001. And that is the 3 years of high school and high school diploma requirement, and has since expanded through AB 2000 and SB 68 most recently in 2017. And so in the next slide, we kind of break, oh no, we don't do that yet. So not yet, but again, as I was mentioning, right, AB 540 is the key to the California DREAM Act, and that the California DREAM Act does require students to be classified or certified as AB 540 in their campus that they're going to be attending in order to receive state-based financial aid. And so again, lots of misinformation that's happening with this. So just your outreach materials, for example, make very clear that these are two separate things and that you need one in order to qualify for the other. And the same with your counselors. Are your counselors aware that these are two different applications that students have to fill out and turn in order to qualify for state-based financial aid? And so on the next slide, we do also kind of break down why it's very important for in-state, for students to receive in-state tuition, because you can see in the different public colleges across the state, out-of-state or non-resident tuition is like more than double the state or in-state or resident fees that students would need to pay at any of the colleges or universities listed. And again, it does open them up to access state-based financial aid through the California DREAM Act if they're eligible for AB 540. And then in the next slide is when we're going to be breaking down the actual requirements for it. And we do have this really great resource that kind of breaks this down, right? That includes the expansion. And so SB 68 actually added adult schools, community college, and associate's degrees and minimum transfer requirements to the eligibility requirements, so that folks pursuing those pathways are now able to get in-state tuition. And so right now, for students to get to qualify for AB 540 or SB 68, they must have attended 3 years full-time at a California high school, adult school, or community college. Or if they graduated early, they must have earned at least 3 years of high school credits in California. And also they can pull in elementary and middle school credits in California to make up that 3 years attendance. And they must have earned either a California high school diploma, a GED or CHESP, or an associate's degree or minimum transfer requirements in order to meet that other degree part of the degree requirement that the law calls for. And this quick guide that we have for you all is also available in Spanish. So that could be information that you also share with your students. And I also will quickly add, unfortunately, there is a cap with credit courses taken at community colleges. So students can currently only use 2 years of that to meet the requirements, and they have to take that 3rd year from either an adult school, a high school, or non-credit courses to meet that requirement. And I know there's laws that's being proposed to change some of that, but that's something to be aware of too. If you all are advising students to pursue community college, for example, maybe to qualify for AB540, they can unfortunately only use 2 years of credit courses from that institution for the 3-year requirement. And then we'll go to the next slide. And so we know that it could also be really hard to maybe track eligibility for some students, especially, I'm not sure if it's the case mostly for folks working with high school directly, but if there's multiple pathways multiple institutions that students are doing, it might be hard to kind of keep track of what they need to qualify. And so we actually have this AB540 and SB68 attendance worksheet that students can fill out and that educators can support them in filling out to keep track of their progress and kind of figure out what they still need to do in order to meet eligibility. And so if we click through, there's actually places in this fillable resource that I think you can also fill out online to kind of count how much attendance you've completed at the different institutions and what kind of institution you attended. And then if you click through again, you're also able to put in what kind of degree the student has earned and from where that is from. And then if they are able to meet the requirements, you click through again. It does go through the different next steps that students actually need to do in order to be certified or qualified as AB540 in their college or university, and that includes turning in that affidavit and submitting all the different forms that submitting the different transcripts they need to do to show that they're AB540 eligible. And then after that, reminding them again that this opens them up for eligibility for state-based financial aid. And again, this is a really great tool that if students don't have everything completed yet, this can kind of help visualize what they still need to do and kind of what next steps they need to take in order to qualify. And then, so our next slide, kind of a more automated version of that tool, right? If students kind of want to get more reassurance, or you all kind of want to get more reassurance about whether or not it looks like a student is eligible for AB540, we have this redesign tool, our California InState Tuition tool, that lets students kind of take some of what they include in their attendance worksheet, including the specific numbers of semesters, credits, or hours they've completed in any California education institution. But they put this in that tool. They put in any degrees that they've completed or anyone that they're working on, and this also gives them kind of an idea whether or not they're eligible for in-state tuition, and if not, what are they still missing, and what are some of the next steps that they can do to take, what are some of the next steps they can take in order to become eligible. And this, we also recently did a webinar on this tool that's available on our YouTube. We'll also share that if you want to learn a little bit more, but you can find the tool on our website. We go through the next slide. You can find that under Services, California InState Tuition Tool, and see if that can help kind of clarify some of the questions around in-state tuition or AB540 for you or your students. And so I think there was a lot of things in the chat. I'm going to take a pause and see if there's any questions right now or reactions that's coming up on any of the things that we've presented to you all so far.
Madeline, could you just go over again the 2-year limit?
Yes, so as I mentioned, for AB 540, you do need 3-year attendance at any of those institutions that I named earlier. We could go back to the slide with the quick guide if that's helpful at all. But unfortunately for community colleges, you can only take 2 years of credit courses. That's the amount you can basically count towards the 3-year eligibility. And so that 3rd year that is needed in order to be fully eligible needs to be taken from either adult school, community college, or high school if a student has that.
And then Myra posted a really good question, which is, so if a student is undocumented and chooses to do 1 year in adult school and then 2 years at a community college and graduates, will they be eligible for AB 540 when they transfer to the 4-year university? And so, yes.
Yes, yeah, because at that case, the student did 2 years at the CC, did a year in adult school, and I assume graduate means they got an associate's degree or they were able to get a transfer, the minimum transfer requirements from the CC. And so when they transfer to their 4-year, they would need to turn in the affidavit still, complete all those steps, and then they'll be eligible for AB 540 and would then be eligible to apply for the California DREAM Act. Yeah, that's a good clarification. Okay. And so I'm going to get us back to the slide that we were at. So if there's also any more questions around AB 540 and SB 68, we're actually doing another like deeper dive on it with these learning labs that we're doing. This is already in 2 weeks, April 8th to April 15th, to get sharing a little bit more about the requirements, right? Sharing some scenarios and how to kind of navigate those different challenges that students may be facing in applying. We're going to be sharing a lot of stuff that's specific to admissions, I think, for colleges. But again, also welcome everybody from high schools, adult schools, and non-credits and CBOs on how they can make sure their students are understanding and taking advantage of AB 540 and also all the opportunities that it opens up, right? And then, so I think that is the end of my part again. If there's any more questions, feel free to throw it in the chat. Let me just see this one really quickly. And maybe I can answer this via chat. And then I think the next part is for Nancy.
Great, thank you so much, Madeline. I think that just having a better understanding about AB 540 and SB 68 is key. And also, as we were mentioning, just making sure that that information is on your outreach materials. I know a lot of students think, well, I told them that I was going to the college. You know, I told them that I had 3 years, I turned in my transcripts, but don't remember that one portion, which is the affidavit that needs to be turned in. So not just eligibility for AB 540, but actually being classified by an AB 540 student. And I was talking earlier, one of the questions was like, are we talking, when we're talking about the 92,000 individuals who are actually enrolled, does that count individuals who don't have AB 540? Yes, it does. There's actually a lot of students at the community colleges that do not have their AB 540 status settled. Or in the adult schools and community colleges, but the adult schools and community colleges are actually not counted in that 92,000 number. But there needs to be done a lot more, I think, in terms of, and again, more around that equitable implementation of AB 540 and SB 68 to make sure that we know what the process is, what the rules are, and that we as educators can counsel with confidence, and that students actually know that if I do X and Y and Z, I will meet the eligibility when I get to the college or university that I want to attend. So I'm going to be talking now just a little bit about successfully navigating the California DREAM Act application. And there's a lot towards navigating that application. I think that, but one thing that I think that's super important is language. Language is key. I always say FAFSA or DREAM. When I became a financial aid counselor, I used to always be like, hey, did you do your FAFSA? And then recognizing that if I only ever mention FAFSA and a student says no, and then I just be like, hey, why didn't you? Because I was a financial aid counselor, I'm actually asking an undocumented student to out themselves. Also, when we see a lot of like the Cash for College or outreach materials or like FAFSA night. So how can we make sure that we're saying FAFSA or DREAM? Because students are listening for cues to make sure that they know that you know about the DREAM Act, or that, you know, like if they don't know, like what's the DREAM Act? And then that can kind of open up a conversation. So really important, I think, in terms of languaging to make sure that we're always saying FAFSA or DREAM. I think also another thing that's super important is how can we make our support visible? How can we make it so that undocumented students don't have to come up and like on the side be like, hey, I'm undocumented, is it okay? But actually, how can we make a sign like this person, like, right, dear undocumented students in these classrooms, they're on their walls. How could we take a picture of ourselves on like undocumented educator or educator out day and be like, I'm an unafraid ally who works with and supports undocumented students? Is there something within your email signature? Is there something in your Zoom background? Is there something when we actually get to all be back in our offices that shows that information prominently? When I worked for San Francisco State and I was doing recruiting for the school, I just put up a sign that says SF State supports undocumented students. And I would get students just coming over and asking me questions, not because they necessarily wanted to come to our school, but because they saw a sign that said, you know, like, you can ask questions here, and this is a safe place to ask questions. So definitely encouraging each of you to be thinking about how you can make those signs and make your support more visible. And then just kind of reiterating this piece about like FAFSA versus DREAM. We have this great chart, which is like how to guarantee that students use the correct application. And then California DREAM Act is for undocumented students. Students with or without DACA should still be using the California DREAM Act application. I've heard from some, they're being like, oh, once you have a social security number, that's all you need for FAFSA. In fact, that's not true. FAFSA cross-checks with the Social Security Administration and DHS. So undocumented, documented, students with U visas and students with TPS protected status should all be using the California DREAM Act application. Students who, in terms of FAFSA applications, students are citizens, students who are citizens but have undocumented parents, because all your requirement is that you are a citizen, not that your parents are citizens. Students who are legal permanent residents, eligible non-citizens according to FAFSA, because there are very specific, if you look on the FAFSA, it'll say specifically who is an eligible non-citizen, and then individuals who have T visa holders. One question that I get a lot about eligible non-citizens is like, when a student has actually applied for asylum, can they actually be considered for the FAFSA? It actually is not just receiving the first paperwork and submitting the application, it's actually kind of being approved, or at least provisional approval. And there's a specific form that they have that's listed again within the eligible non-citizen categories of FAFSA. Until then, students should either be using the California DREAM Act if they meet the AB540 eligibility, or using scholarships if they don't meet eligibility for AB540 yet. And then this tells you information too about like, well, what if, you know, like who's eligible, who's not eligible, what are the requirements, you know, like what happens if you fill out the wrong application. And I'm really excited that the California Student Aid Commission has put out this form, which is called the G55 Form from the California Student Aid Commission. So if your student completes a FAFSA but should have done the DREAM application, or vice versa, you can actually work with the financial aid office at your school to have them reverse the incorrect application out and bring in the correct application. This is also good if a student fills out an application for the wrong year, or if they submitted duplicate applications. This is also helpful if a student is going to able to adjust their status. I've worked with students who are in the process of receiving some adjustment of status, legal permanent residency, or citizenship. So they would apply as whatever their status is at that time, because we know there's a big backlog. Students would apply for the California DREAM Act application. And if/when they actually get that status approved, then you would work with the school to have them pull out the DREAM application and pull in the FAFSA application. And the thing that's great about the California Student Aid Commission in this place as well is that they will honor the very first date that the student applied. So if you submitted the wrong application, you know, before March 2nd, and then you realized, oh, in April, I need to submit that, they've actually are honoring that first date that the application is being submitted. So super important to remember that. Also, we do have a resource which is specifically for students who are citizens, but whose parents are undocumented, or sometimes can be considered mixed status households. And that's because it can be really complicated for a student when they fill out their FAFSA application. They would use all their own information. Their parents would put in zeros for the social security number for the parents, and then the parent would need to use the parent signature page. So they could not get an FSA ID and submit that but they could actually print out the parent signature page, bring it in, mail it to the school, to the FAFSA. And I would also encourage them to consider bringing it into the school that they want to attend to see if the school could actually process that parent signature page any faster. It's not always guaranteed, but some financial aid officers will be able to do that. And just knowing that it takes a long time for that parent signature page to catch up with the application. And anytime a student makes a significant change on the application, they would have to resubmit a parent signature page as well. So just some ideas in terms of kind of getting us settled about like who should be using which application and what happens if you use the wrong application. Oops. And so when you get our, that's by mistake that I brought you there, but when you get our PowerPoint, we've actually linked all of these resources there. You can also find our resources. Let me just quickly show you that. If you go to the Immigrants Rising website, similar like Madeline was showing you, again, the InState Tuition tool, you go to services and here's our InState Tuition tool. If you go to resources, we do have a lot of resources. So you could search by keyword, but it doesn't always bring up the most relevant information first. I encourage individuals to just go here to the overview of resources and then scroll down until you get to higher education. Then you'll see information specifically about the InState Tuition, all about the California Dream Act, all about scholarships, applying for scholarships, building your scholarship essay. We have resources for educators and students. We have a binder. We have this great quick guide to college access for undocumented students, top 10 ways to support students. And then actually down here, if you're in college or university or thinking about this for your campus, some institutional practices as well. We also have legal resources, entrepreneurship information, but I just think that great way of going to resources and then clicking on the overview is the best way to actually get to the resources that you need for the Immigrants Rising website. And then just in terms of the navigating the California Dream Act, I'm not sure how many of you have actually seen the California Dream Act map that we've created. This is created by myself and the team at Immigrants Rising. And I think that's something that's really important. Even if you can't tell all of the different phases on there, you can tell, wow, there's a lot of different phases. Like up here, phase 1 is actually where you apply. And then it's at the very, very end here where you actually get the student aid. So we've created this optimal timeline, which thinks about, so that I used to just be like, when I was an outreach counselor before I became a financial aid counselor, I was just like, submit your application by March 2nd. That's all you need to do. But realizing like, wow, there's a whole bunch of steps behind that to make sure that the student actually gets the money in their hand and that tuition is paid for. This map I think is great also because it says like student does this, parent does this, the California Student Aid Commission does that. So phase 1 is really just about making sure that the student submits it correctly. Phase 2 is making sure that the GPA is actually received by the California Student Aid Commission. They can check that at mygrantinfo.csac.ca.gov. Phase 3 is making sure that the application is actually valid. And we'll be talking about some of the main reasons that students do not get, they get an error on their Dream Act application. But this is really important in terms of making sure that they have a valid Dream application, that it's listed at the right school. And this is where they can get selected for income verification. We'll be talking about that later as well. Anywhere there's a little star here means there's other resources that we've created to help support you and the students that you're working with in that phase. And then phase 4 is really making sure like using your financial aid, get that money in your pocket, or at least to pay the tuition, and figure out also like, is my financial aid going to cover all of my tuition? Do I still have to pay more? Who's going to help me pay for books and such? And then one area that I think is really turning in the affidavit. And then in the one area that I think is really important is in 2021, SB 169 put out that young men are no longer required to provide proof of their selective service to be able to receive their financial aid. This was true for FAFSA, and now it's true for the California Dream Act application as well. So this is important to just be considering all these different phases. And Hugo is putting some great information in there about making sure that when you turn in that parent signature page, or anytime that you're sending something into the California Student Aid Commission, really important to get a certificate of mailing. That costs maybe like $1.20, $1.50. You get it at the the post office, and it lets you know that if they say they never got it, you have proof that you actually mailed it. So you can say like it was mailed by the deadline or by this or that date. Also, Ugo's saying that it's important to know that the GPA for financial aid can be corrected if there's an error that was found. So yeah, we'll be talking again later, like what are some of the things that can be corrected and ones that cannot, to make sure that we can do as much as we can to get the correct information to the California Student Aid Commission and to our schools. Let me take a sec here. Is March 2nd a hard deadline for the California DREAM Act, or is it similar to the FAFSA where it's still going on until June? So March 2nd is a priority deadline for the California DREAM Act, or for Cal Grants and for financial aid generally. Students can definitely still apply, and they can actually apply all the way until June of the upcoming year. But some aid, like the Cal Grants and sometimes the CSU grants, are only available if students meet the priority deadline. So if a student misses March 2nd or this year, April 1st, they should definitely still apply. Some schools will still have aid, like UCs often have institutional aid. The community colleges still have the promise grants. Some CSUs will still have CSU state grant aid, but it's best to try to get students to apply before then. But if they can't, definitely important to make sure that that's going to be important, that they still apply when is necessary. Those are the main questions that I see right now. Madeline and Rocio, did you see anything else that I should be addressing right now?
I think there was a really good and interesting question. I don't know if you have an answer to this, Nancy, which is what happens if a student was enrolled in a California high school, however, because of the pandemic, they couldn't come back into the country, but they continue to do distance learning and were enrolled at the high school. Can they still qualify for AB540?
I think that that would really be considered. I mean, the way that the affidavit is listed is, were you currently enrolled in a California college, and did you attend a high school, community college, adult school for this period of time? I think it would depend how it would show up on the transcripts. And of course, the idea is the student, the sort of like the spirit of the law is that the student is here and they are enrolled. So I think that that would probably be a case-by-case approval at the campus level. But I think that the spirit of the law is that the student was here based on the pandemic, and that the affidavit actually talks about attendance. We'd have to probably dig into that a little bit deeper. And I would encourage you to connect with the school that the student's going to attend to try to see how they might respond to that answer, or that question, excuse me. Great. So, yikes, I gotta stop doing that. So I think that we are ready just about 11 o'clock. So we're going to take a short break. I can stay here for that break, answer any questions if people have specific questions. But when we come back, we're going to be digging a little bit more into like what are some of the common areas that students face when they're applying, how are some ways to correct the applications, what can a financial aid counselor help you with, what can they not, and also have time for each of you to kind of talk about some of what you've learned. So right now it is 10:58. If we could come back at 11:03, that'll give us about 5 minutes, 11:03, maybe 11:05, just to kind of give us a minute to breathe. We will be back at 11:05, and we're looking forward to continuing this conversation with all of you. Okay, it's about 11:05. Hoping everybody can come back. We're glad that all of you are here. I got a couple of great questions while I was on break. And one I wanted to just answer quickly for everyone is that, you know, students can sometimes, when they submit their application to a school, get information back about residency classification. And I know when I looked at those residency classification documents, they're kind of scary because they're like, when is your visa? Like they're asking for all this documentation and information. What I would encourage you to do to support your students would be to connect with, you know, like have them, it depends on the school, but oftentimes they want you to go through that residency classification to then verify that you actually need the AB540 affidavit. So sometimes to try to just sort of cut right to the chase, I would try to contact the admissions office and say, you know, the student would say like, I'm an AB540 eligible student. Can I just turn in my affidavit? Because they probably don't have a lot of the information that they could provide for that other information. If you're actually talking about residency for tuition purposes and the student is trying to meet residency for tuition purposes, we have a document that talks about how do students show that. And there's a number of different documents that individuals can use that are undocumented. And I can answer questions about that individually. My email is nancy@immigrantsrising.org. But we're going to continue now with the focus on the California DREAM Act application, and wanted to just be thinking like, what can we do to increase California DREAM Act award rates? So I know that we're sharing a lot of information with you. This is me actually trying to talk slow. So if you have questions, please just throw up your hand, put it in the chat, you know, be like, hey, slow down. But we want to try to share as much information with you as we can in somewhat bite-sizable pieces so that you can figure out the best ways to help increase California DREAM Act award rates on your school, within your organization, or with the students that you serve. So I'm going to talk really something about that I think is so important is about this confirmation page, about actually resolving common errors that are there. How can you make a friend in financial aid and just hook it up with your financial aid peeps to try to make sure that you're getting the accurate information that you need for your students? And then what can we do kind of moving forward? So we do have closed captioning available. If you would like that, we're late in announcing that, I apologize, but that is available. You can just click on the link on your screen. So in terms of the confirmation page, as a financial aid counselor, I think that this, or former financial aid counselor, this confirmation page is so important. It comes up right after, so students go through the pieces of it, and they're like, okay, instructions, the student information, dependency, parent, the signature, and then the very next one is a confirmation page. I would encourage students to check that every single time that they're touching their California DREAM Act application. Touch it immediately. Once you submit your application, it tells you, is there any action needed? So right here, this says no further action is needed. But if there was action needed, it would tell you right down here, you need to do X and Y and Z. It's like parent signature. What if you had an error with your taxes? Like the confirmation page is so important. And it's a great tool. I'd be talking with students and they'd come in and talk to me in the summer. They'd signed up for the orientation. They're like, out of my financial aid, I'd look in all the different places. And then I'd go back with them to actually look on the confirmation page, and they'd submitted it on February 28th. And ever since then, there was to-do items that they weren't aware of. So definitely checking that confirmation page can be key. Also, we have this great resource that we created at Immigrants Rising. Like, now that you've finished your California DREAM Act application, what are the key steps to ensure that students receive all financial aid for which they're eligible? So if you're not on our social media stream yet, I definitely encourage you to check out our Instagram page at Immigrants Rising or Facebook/Immigrants Rising, because this great resource, as well as lots of others, are available. So the first one, after you complete your application, make sure the confirmation page has nothing left outstanding. Make sure that the parent, if it's required, the parent sign that application. Double check your application for any errors, because that next tab is the Cal ISER. You can be like, sometimes a student just puts an extra zero and it can throw everything off, right? And then make sure that the student is reviewing their portal at each school. If they were to look at this on the Instagram Live, the next part would then be like, okay, after that, make sure that if you have to do any California DREAM Act income verification, that you're up to date on those pieces, that you've monitored your web grants for students, that you've actually accepted the financial aid through the student portal to keep their options open. I know at the UCs, in terms of accepting admissions, you can only accept admission at one school. But I encourage students, when they're doing their financial aid, accept financial aid at all the schools they're highly considering. And then you can be like, here's my admission, here's my financial aid award. And then when they figure out the school that they're actually going to, then it's really important that they go back and erase all the other schools, like unaccept that award, because you can only receive financial aid at one school. But you don't want to be offered award and then you don't accept it, and then they give it to the next person, and then you've actually decided that's your school and there's no more aid for you. So definitely encouraging students to do that. And then the last part really is to just make sure they submit their affidavit and make sure that they are registered for the classes to be able to receive all the financial aid that they have eligibility for. So definitely thinking about what are the steps after you submit your California Dream application, what can we as educators help them to do? You know, for a little minute there, I was making TikTok videos. I have not kept up on it, but like, where are the students at? Where can we send out this information? Some schools have been able to actually send out text messages. Like, could some of these be like little snippet pieces that you put out? Or how do we just put it kind of more in our language so that we're saying like, oh, you submitted it, here's your next thing to do. And then I wanted to just kind of, oops, I'm not paying attention to the chat. But I think that the thing that's most important is there's some problems that are the most common that actually show up with the California Dream Act application. One, which we're all pretty familiar with, is that the name on the application for the Dream application is different than the name for the school, is different than the name of the transcripts. We want to make sure that all of those names are actually accurate and correct. And CSAC does have a form that can be filled out to kind of update so that you get those correct, the name gets corrected. Lots of times people are over the tax filing limits. They're like, oh, I didn't file taxes, but actually their income requires that they file taxes. That can be a problem. It's also confusing the way that the Dream application is listed in the FAFSA too, is that they submit they say how much money did you earn? And then they say, how many taxes did you pay? And then they want you to break out the income, or what's your AGI, what are taxes paid, and then what's the income? So sometimes students end up putting their actual, or parents put their income and their taxes as the exact same thing. That is a very common area. Biological or adoptive parents are not listed. Students and parents didn't sign the application, most times the parent. And then often the number of the household is not the number of the biological family. So maybe I live with 6 people, but it's just my mom, my dad, and my brother. So that would be 4 of us. And then like my aunt and my uncle are there. But if there's only the biological family or the ones that my family is financially responsible for, that's my number of my household.
And so we're getting some questions and comments in the chat around transcripts. And I believe this is only for the UC. Transcripts at the UC are submitted to the residency office. And I think I'll let you answer it, but yeah, students are only sending transcripts to admissions office. And there's a question around, does every college have a residency?
Yeah, super important question. Thank you. So at the CSU and the CCC, the affidavit goes to the admissions department. Within the UCs, it's actually the registrar that is sending that information where the student needs to send that information, because the the registrar's office determines eligibility for AB540. My hope is that if those affidavits get sent to admissions at the UC, that they would send them over to the registrar's office, but that's the direct line that they should go. For the UC, they should go to the registrar's office. For the CSU and the CCC, they should go to the admissions office. And then in terms of, does every college have a residency deputy? Every college has somebody that is in charge of making sure that the correct residency determination is made, whether students should be paying tuition as a resident or as a non-resident, and if they get an exemption from paying non-resident fees. So it's important to try to figure out, some different schools have different systems, like they do the alphabet sometimes, but it is usually one person is in charge of making that final determination of who has eligibility for the for residency on behalf of the school. Thank you. So those are some of the most common problems with the California Dream Act application. CSAC has this excellent cheat sheet, and we can throw this link right into the chat about how do you resolve some of these common issues. Like, what if you have the name is varied, the date of birth is listed incorrectly? What about the parent signature? You know, the wrong application is listed. So they actually go step by step. Oh, do the G55 form. CSAC can force match an application with their GPA. So the CSAC is a great place to get a lot of that information. It will be showing you where to find that more, but I think this cheat sheet that they've created is super helpful. And so we're going to throw that in the chat so you can take a look at that as well. If the name or the date of birth is incorrectly listed, this form that the California Student Aid Commission created for the California Dream Act application, this is specifically for the California Dream Act application. FAFSA has their own form that you would fill out. But colleges can edit the name in the California Dream Act correction screen, or the student can submit this G19 change request form. This is also if the student lists their date of birth wrong. So these are really important pieces because that's how they're matching. They're matching them by name, they're matching them by date of birth. And so it's really important that these are all exactly correct. If a student's like, wait, where's my California DREAM Act ID? They're like, where is that? If the student actually goes back into the California DREAM Act application and goes to that confirmation page, the DREAM Act ID will be listed there. The Cal ICER that gets sent to their email will also list the California DREAM Act ID. So those are important pieces to have. And then in terms of what about if the parent forgot the PIN? Oh my gosh, right? This is always happening and it's always at the last minute. And then you're trying to call CSAC and then they, have lots of people on hold. So it takes a long time. So they've said, if the student, a parent of a student has forgotten their PIN number or the PIN number isn't working, they have the option to use, yes, I forgot my PIN. And normally what they want is they want to know the student's information, their date of birth, then they want to know the parent's name, their parent's date of birth, and usually the income that was listed on the DREAM application. If you can't get all that information, then what they actually encourage you to do is simply default to be like, no, I don't have a PIN. And then you'd actually just have to form a new PIN. Now, when parents form PINs for the California DREAM Act application, that PIN is specific to the student. So if I have 3 children and they're all applying for the California DREAM Act application as a parent, I need 3 PINs. One for, Maria, one for Tinoch, and one for Jose. Like those are the different places that I would have to have all those different pieces that I would be using that for. So if they forget the PIN when they're signing in, because they're like, oh my gosh, I got 3 PINs, how am I going to do that? This is a great opportunity that CSAC is recommending for them to make sure that that application gets submitted. One thing I will say though is if the student submits the application by March 2nd or by April 1st, even if the parent has not yet submitted their application, the student makes sure they submit their own, they can add the parent signature page later, or they can add their PIN and sign the application at a later date. So always important to make sure that they try to submit that application on time. And then income verification. We have lots of students who are like, oh my gosh, income verification. Sometimes students see that they're getting selected for income verification and poof, that's the last we see of them, right? We're like, I don't know how to do that. How's that going to happen? So we've created this verifying your income for the California DREAM Act application. This one's for 22-23. We still have the 21-22 application up there. It's got a specific focus for undocumented students. It uses language that's careful and aware of undocumented student needs. It talks about being a dependent versus independent student, about household size, tax filers, non-tax filers, and it kind of talks about what happens, right? You submit your California application. If you get selected for the income verification, my understanding is that like about 1 of every 4 or 5 students get selected for income verification, unless there's an error, and then you get selected immediately. Once they submit the income verification, that information is verified on the DREAM application, and then they can offer the financial aid award. But if they don't submit the income verification, they're never going to be able to receive what their financial aid award could be. So it talks about tax filers, it talks about non-tax filers, and I know this is a question that we always get, like what if my parents don't file taxes? Or what if I, as an undocumented student, don't file taxes? So this is a change in the last year or so, that if you actually said that you don't file taxes, but you list your income over the guideline, the application stops. It won't allow you to go, you won't be able to have a valid application that you could submit. So every year the IRS actually talks about like, what are the tax filing requirements? Like if I make, this year is if you're single and you're under 65, if you make more than $12,550, you're required to file taxes. If you're the head of household, that bumps up to $18,800, right? If you're married and filing jointly, $25,100. So I've had many of conversations as a financial aid counselor. I'm sure a lot of you as both, financial aid support people, as high school counselors, as individuals who are financial aid counselors yourself. How can we have a conversation with the students and the parents? Sometimes I'd be talking to the parents and I'd be talking to them about the benefits and the potential risks of filing a IRS tax return. Students and parents are able to get an individual tax identification number, and it can be scary, but there are actual individuals that specifically support undocumented individuals to file their taxes. And while I never tell a parent, file taxes or don't file taxes, I can say, if you're selected for income verification and you don't file, your student cannot get aid. If you do file, and even if you're required to pay, let's say you pay $1,000 in taxes, but you end up getting somewhere between like $2,000 or $7,000 or $13,000 at the UC, you did have to pay a little bit, but if you're low income and you meet the eligibility, the student could actually end up of that cost benefit to actually be receiving a lot more aid if they pay taxes or not. So something just to consider. Again, we're not telling individuals that they have to, but just kind of helping them better understand the process. Because if the IRS income is over the tax filing limit, like I said, the student cannot proceed with the application. So let me pause for a minute because that's pretty dense information and I'm wondering if there are any questions. So someone's saying, what if I have a student that is applying for FAFSA, but her dad won't give up the tax information? He still claims her, but refuses to cooperate. Is there a way for her to file independently? She also does not work. So this is a situation that I encountered a lot where, unfortunately, if the student is still in contact with a parent, if he's still claiming her, if there hasn't been some kind of reason that it would cause her physical or emotional harm to contact the parent, but they just don't want to give up the tax information, unfortunately, the student is kind of at a standstill. The school cannot go forward if they need the parent's information, and the student can't, so the school can't go forward without the parent information. And if the parent won't give the information, then the student is kind of caught in this really hard place. Students cannot be considered, and I'll talk about this a little bit more detailed later on, is that students cannot be considered independent of their parents unless very specific circumstances take place. So I've even worked with students where they are helping to support the parents, right? But they're still considered independent because they haven't met those specific reasons. So let me see if that's the next, where I am in that slide. And so that's the time when I would actually just talk to the parent to try to see if, like, would the parent be willing to talk to me? Is there a way that we could reassure them that this information is just information that's protected by the FERPA, as well as by there's a FAFSA filing electronic protection that's also there. These are important things to consider. Also, we want to just talk to you about students meeting the cost of attendance. How do we actually let students know whether their financial aid is going to actually help them cover the costs that they have? I'd be at the financial aid counselor, students would come up, they'd be like, I'm so excited. I did my dream application, sometimes even with a FAFSA, I did my dream application, I'm going to stay in the dorms. And then we take a look at their financial aid award. And at the CSU and the CCC, the majority of the financial aid awards do not cover the full cost of attendance. Only one award, the Cal Grant B, would cover the full cost of attendance and give you a little bit of opportunity to be able to have, would meet the full cost of tuition and have a little bit left over for books. So we have a great budget worksheet that helps students actually figure out what is their estimated cost of attendance, what kind of Cal Grants are actually available, or other institutional aid at the CSU, the CCC, or the UC, scholarship aid, and then other opportunities to pay for college. I like the student budget worksheet because you don't have to cross out, okay, I don't get the Pell, I don't get the loans, I don't get the, there's California Dream Act loans on there, but this helps provide more of a undocumented student specific opportunity. And there's a great video, which we don't have time to show, but is listed on our undocumented budget worksheet as well, that will help students try to figure out whether they're going to owe money to the school or they're going to have extra money. And then we can talk about scholarship money that will help them pay. So I saw that a question came in. Someone saying, just to make sure I understand the information, Nancy, you said that if a student meets the threshold to file taxes but didn't, then the DREAM Act application selected for verification no longer become eligible to receive aid. That's true, but it's actually, I was also saying that within the application, if you fill into the application and you say, I did not file, but your income is over the filing limits, then the application will not actually be able to be successfully submitted and be considered a valid application. They would have to fix that and say, I will file my taxes. and then they would get selected for income verification to show those taxes. Okay, so California DREAM Act resources. There is a lot of resources available on the California web grants for on the CSAC website. You can just look under schools and counselors. There's also information right on the web grants for students login. So this is a great place for your students to be checking that information out. Also on the California DREAM Act, which is dream.csac.ca.gov, on this teeny tab up on the top here, there's a lot of information and resources. That's also really helpful for undocumented students to fill out. And so that information can include all kinds of different pieces, such as this is, if you clicked on that link that I showed you on that very tippy top, it's got information about video, training videos, paper applications in PDF in English and Spanish, FAQs, that name and date, the parental signature form and common issues and more. So this is a great place to be looking at. Again, that's just at the dream.csac.ca.gov and right up here in this teeny tiny little font in the corner. So that's a great place just to kind of be looking for information. Also, CSAC has their websites, they have contact information, they have school support, which I think is more predominantly school support for people that are working directly in processing the California DREAM Act applications, but I would definitely call them myself. And try to see if you could get information for high schools as well. I'd also encourage you to check out their listserv. If you haven't looked at their listserv yet, signed up for it yet, I think it's really great to get that information. If we could throw that in the chat, that would be really helpful. So those are just important to be thinking about. And then I'm going to do this reflection in one sec. Madeline, I just want to jump over here in terms about making friends and financial aid. Actually, I'd encourage you to make friends in the top 5 schools that your students are frequenting. There's some financial aid counselors on here today, so maybe you already have one friend in financial aid, but I think it's important to just be thinking about those pieces as we go. So these are some top tips for building stronger relationships with your financial aid counselors. I would definitely try to call together with the student whenever possible. If you call as your support person, they're not going to be able to allow you to speak on behalf of the student. So the student needs to be there and you're kind of modeling the kind of information. Having students have the student ID number ready, that's always going to be the first information that the financial aid counselor is probably going to ask. You should take notes, please, please, please. Nancy said this, she told me to do that. Make sure that you ask for their name, right? So that when you go back, ask for their email, so that when you go back, you can not just be like, I talked to someone and they told me this, be like, on April 2nd, I talked to Nancy and she told me to do this. And that way you can try to actually go back and say, like talk to Nancy again and make sure that she does what she says. When I would talk to hundreds of students through that answering the phone, but if they told me what the situation is, I might not remember their name, but I would remember the situation. And then I'd be like, oh yeah, I did X or Y, or oh my gosh, I haven't done that yet. Let's kind of move forward on the process. So I think this can be really helpful, modeling this for our students and actually just kind of doing some of that due diligence first. Did you check your confirmation page? Did you check your web grants for students login? Did you check the student portal? And if it's not the information you need there, then be like, hey, how can you guys help me out? I need this information. And then knowing what's possible for financial aid offices to do and not. They might be able to update the FAFSA or the DREAM with a proper verification. They can switch out the incorrect application. They can work with you about a change of income petition. They can say, hey, your dependent make you independent under specific circumstances, but they can't change if you miss the priority deadline. They can't make, say that it's okay for others than biological or adoptive parents unless they do a special circumstances petition. They can't make you financially independent if you're under 24. They can't change information that you actually or the student has to change on their DREAM or FAFSA application, and they can't go beyond the FAFSA or the DREAM application limits, the satisfactory academic progress. But I think it's really important, like, how do you know? I'm so sorry, that should say 1999. I changed it, but I didn't change it here. So if they're born before 1/1/1999, apologize if that's wrong. They're not married, if they don't have their own dependent children or dependent children that their dependents that they provide more than 50% of their support, if they're not attending graduate school or active in the armed forces, if they're not a certified court minor within the United States, legal guardianship, foster care, etc., or they're not homeless or at risk of homelessness, they're required to put their parent information in there. So I'm gonna just, again, that is 1/1/1999. That changes each year. And someone was saying before, like, what happens if the FAFSA, if the student is homeless or at risk of homelessness? If the student is homeless or at risk of homelessness, they would actually need to provide documentation of that and share that with the financial aid office at all the different financial aid offices that they're considering to attend. So if a student does not meet any of these qualifications, but it would cause them some kind of physical or emotional harm to contact their parents, then they would need to write a letter and say, it would cause me physical harm to contact my parents, or this is a circumstance and this is why I'm not at home. And then maybe you as a support person who also knows that, you would also write the letter. Both of those letters would go to the financial aid office, and then that would be called a dependency override. That's the only circumstance where they would not be required to provide their parent information. Not like the tax example that we had before, the parent is their parent and they're living with their parent, but they won't provide it, or they're even not living with them, but they won't provide it. It's more that it would cause them some kind of physical or emotional harm to contact their parents. So I'm gonna pass it. That's a lot of information. We're gonna just pause a little bit for some reflections, and you can just go to menti.com to see actually kind of like what struck you from that. We just go ahead and throw that in the chat, and then I will go ahead and put that up. Somebody said, will the CADA be changing to mirror the new FAFSA in 2023? Yes. The changes that are being made on the FAFSA to simplify the FAFSA will also be updated and revised the California DREAM Act application, because the California DREAM Act application is mirrored on the FAFSA. So I hope that information is helpful to you. Let me get to the Mentimeter, and I can actually just throw that up there. Wait, Madeline, can you throw that in the chat? Can you send that to me in the chat? The Menti link, or maybe I can find it from our other Menti time. But if you have any questions, if you have different information, please go ahead and let us know. We're here. We want to answer some of the questions that you have, and we're going to just take a quick look right now with that wham bam of information that you received. What are some of the things that are reflections? What struck you the most? So people learned about AB540. People are really glad that there are resources available, you know, and definitely the breakdown between AB540 and the connection, you know, in order to be able to qualify. The 2021 filing requirements for most taxpayers, right? These are all important pieces of information. We're glad that you find this information helpful. Really important to know the difference between the FAFSA and the DREAM. And then someone's saying, can students run out of eligibility for the California DREAM Act application? For example, how students can run out of eligibility for Cal Grants and Pell Grants. Yes, the same limits that apply for satisfactory academic progress or maximum units apply for the California DREAM Act, just like the FAFSA. They also apply if you're talking about Cal Grants. Cal Grants has a 4-year limit if you get it as a high school entitlement, 4 years of full-time, up to 2 years as a transfer entitlement, depending on whether they enter as a junior or a senior. So there are definitely limits, and students should check in with their financial aid counselors to know more about that. Let's see what else people are finding helpful. People are feeling more supported at more adept at supporting undocumented Oakland youth. So glad to hear that. Parents file taxes if they do not meet the federal threshold. Flyers are helpful to have on hand, right? Really important to know the statistic regarding the number of undocumented students and the actual number of students applying. So that's really true. And the 3 years of qualifying. So we'll just keep taking a peek at this as we move along, but I'm going to pass it back to my colleague Madeline, who's just going to give a quick pitch about websites and the importance of having information on websites. Madeline, thanks so much.
Yeah, so we know that there is a lot of different information being shared right now too. So thankfully everything's recorded. Feel free to recap everything through little bits when you get the chance to. And again, all the links are like being shared both in the PowerPoint and in the chat if you're already curious to look at those too. So thank you all for just engaging with us in that part. But I do also want to quickly say that this is something that we always encourage of our colleges that we're working with, but increasingly like websites and just online information is really the way that students, especially undocumented students, right, are finding about the different resources and support that is available to them. So if for high schools too, I'm not really sure if websites are the way a way that you all are engaging with students yet. But I know for community-based organizations, you most likely have a website, right, that you're sharing information with the folks that you're serving with. So how do you make sure that the things included on your web pages are most up to date and accurate and inclusive of undocumented students? And so we actually do have this guide called Strengthening Your Campus Website for Undocumented Students. It is geared towards California colleges and universities, but I do believe that it could be adapted if you're just looking for what resources to share around college access for undocumented students. And in the next slide, we do kind of outline like why it's really important for websites to be reflective of the resources that are out there for undocumented students, especially with the pandemic, right? The internet is just some of the first places that students look for information, and it can help them weed out what schools are able to offer them to attend their institution. And it can help kind of signal to students that like, hey, this is a school that is supportive of undocumented students. There's a lot of information on their website around it, or it could even help lead them to the direction of how to find information about resources for undocumented students. And then having all this information out in public also makes it so that students don't necessarily have to disclose their status to like individuals or to departments or anything like that in order to find or at least learn about what different supports are available out there for them. In the next slide, the guide is specifically geared towards financial aid, admissions, and undocumented student support at the different colleges and universities. But we do pull out for those different web pages, we do pull out different like resources and components that are super important to include if you're trying to raise awareness about the California Dream Act, for example. And so there's a little portion in the guide that talks about financial aid and how financial aid websites could be a little bit could be strengthened, and that includes including information about California Dream Act and its what it is, its eligibility, benefits, and how to apply. And scholarships are also increasingly another way that students, right, are funding their education. And how do you also make sure that your students are aware that scholarships exist for even for those who don't have citizenship in this country. And then we also share many of the resources that we've already shared with you all today about that could be embedded on your website to help students in their processes of applying for the California Dream Act. And we also included some like additional elements, including the resource around income verification, mixed status families, for example, as other things to just improve that, improve the knowledge sharing that's included in web pages. And we do have this really helpful checklist that's attached to that guide. So if you do have a web page that provides information for financial aid for undocumented students, you can kind of go through it and see what is already included on there, check it off, and kind of see what else would help to include in order to strengthen the information that is included on there. And I think we just threw that link in the chat too, so feel free to check all that out. Yeah, and I see a question around the scholarships. That is coming out, I believe, at the end of the month of April. So look out for that. We're going to be sending out a lot of communication. But on Instagram, we do highlight, I believe, every Friday, just like some upcoming scholarship deadlines already. So again, encourage your students to follow us on Instagram, or you yourself to follow us on Instagram if you have that, so you are kept aware of like different scholarship deadlines for undocumented students. And so I think we're we're open to taking questions or even reflections and comments at this point. Feel free to put that in the chat or unmute yourself as well.
Thank you, Rocio. Also, I think this is really important to be looking at this campaign for college opportunity undocumented student resources map. If you go to this map and you're like, well, I'm just one person, what are all the different schools, how's everybody helping me? You can actually just go into this map and it'll show you, here's the community colleges, here's the CSUs, here's the UCs, and they're starting to put a couple of privates on there as well. When you click at any of the ones that have the little star, actually have an undocumented student center or program. They tell you about the school, the name, the website if they have one, contact information, email. So these are great to have. Also, you can just see, okay, here's South Lake Tahoe. They have admissions or financial aid piece of information. If this information is incorrect, then they actually have a link on here where you could actually ask for that to be updated. So they have independent colleges, community colleges, UCs, and CSUs. So definitely encourage you to take a look at that. If you're like, wait, my student's going to a school, I don't even know anybody there. This is a great way that we can help students figure out those pieces, that we can just build that network and web across the state. Rocio, anything else you would add around that?
No, and I think this is a really great resource in case there's any specific questions. I know that oftentimes the questions that might come up for a student might be very specific to the campus. So that's also a really great way to be able to connect with someone if there are any specific questions. That might be like a case-by-case situation, depending on the school and the student as well.
Yeah, that's a really important point that you raised, Rocio, right? Like, and that's one of the things that we're trying to resolve with the AB540 equitable implementation. But what one school might interpret, another school might have a different date. They might say, affidavits need to be in by this date. Others are like, you can do that throughout the semester. What kind of information is available. So that's really important to figure out. Other questions that people have, I do say that someone's saying, can you repeat what you meant by parents must file taxes if they do not fulfill the federal threshold? I was a little bit confused. I read that from the file. What I meant by that is that individuals actually are required to make a certain amount over the years. They need to actually file taxes. So there is an income threshold that, like, you have to make a certain amount of income. If you make this amount of income, you are required to file taxes. So if an individual makes over the $12,550 as one person, that means they're over the tax filing threshold. They have to file taxes. If they only made $12,000, they would not be required to file taxes. They'd still be required to put that information on the California Dream Act application or the FAFSA application. So just basically before, and this is like if the IRS income is over the tax filing limit, over that threshold, the student cannot go forward with the application. They won't be able to get their California Dream Act aid even considered, because the schools, the FAFSA and the Dream Act require that if you're over the tax filing limits, that you actually had to file taxes. Yeah. Other questions people have, comments, ideas? We'd love for a couple of you to share. We wanted to put you into breakout groups, but I think I spoke too long. I shared too much information and that we don't really have time for that, but we would love to hear from a couple of you. Please come off mute. Show your face if you like to. If not, just let us know. What is something that you learned today that you're really excited about? What's a question that you have that you want to make sure that you can get the answer to before the end of the day? We're really appreciative of all of the time that each of you have spent being here today. So we'd love to just get a couple of impressions. You can go ahead and put that in the chat if you want. But basically the questions that we'd love for you to answer is, what is one thing that excited you most from what was shared? What's one thing that you can take back to your school or organization today? And then what is what's possible moving forward? So these are just one of the questions that we'd love for you to answer. If a couple people would just be willing to come off of mute and tell us that, or throw it in the chat. What's one thing that you took away today that you're like, dude, I'm on it? Don't be shy. Adding Immigrants Rising resources to the website, that's great. We would love for you to embed our resources. We'd love for you to have them up at your school. share them during your Dream Act and your FAFSA nights?
I'll just say something, and I think it's very important to stay up to date. That's the main thing. I've been doing this for a very long time, but there's never enough information, right? Everything's just changing. Every time you turn around, something changes, and I think it's up to us to stay updated, and it's up to us if somehow we're in charge of our websites to provide some key websites as well to be able to direct students to the websites. But one of the things that I wanted to mention was, and I think it was from the beginning, when I present to students, my first slide is about undocumented students, right? Whether I'm talking about admissions to colleges, requirements, financial aid, it doesn't matter what I'm talking about. I think kids need to be included. Everyone needs to be included. And it's one of the things that you were mentioning. And I think we can't start a presentation about financial aid or for systems of higher ed, and then in the middle say, oh, for undocumented students, well, maybe we lost the students in the beginning, right? Because we didn't welcome them. And I think it's always important to be able to start off like that. So even when I conduct counselor in trainings for various districts, my first slide is about undocumented students, right? And this year, I think we presented to over 700 counselors. And that's our first slide that they see, right? The importance of being able to inform at that level, right? And I think it's important to just remind ourselves that we need to start from that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hugo. That is so important. I love that idea of just starting right from the start, right? Because you don't want to wait till the last slide or even the middle slide to be like, hey, this is for you too. Like Rocio said, student might have already checked out right at that point. And also it might be hard for us to know, or maybe for the schools that you're in, you're like, yes, I can definitely see this, but there are still high school educators, college educators right now that are not aware of the California Dream Act, that are not telling students that there's actually aid for all students to be able to go to school, scholarships so they don't meet eligibility for AB540, and pathways to AB540 if they don't meet that eligibility right now. So important. Madeline, do you see some stuff in the chat? What's going on in the chat?
Yeah, it looks like somebody was struck about the number of students who apply but just don't receive their aid, right? The funnel thing that you showed earlier. So how there's a lot of room to grow, and spending more time following up and looking at the confirmation page for the financial aid and making sure students are set to receive their aid.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of things around resources, right? Sharing those with their students, the next steps, and fighting against the culture of just saying FAFSA and basically having to ask students to like reveal their status in order to get the aid they receive. So how can this be more incorporated in the normal school culture and normalized in that way?
Yeah, so important. Yeah.
Sorry, if I could share.
Yes.
I'm Carolina. I'm a college and career specialist in a high school here in Orange County. And for me this year, it terrified me to see how many students didn't come to get assistance from me on the Dream Act. So I know something's missing. Like when we do class presentations, like, you know, I say it and I say it, I send emails, but it terrifies me to see that I had a handful of students come in to get assistance with it this year. So even for me to have the knowledge that I learned, like I printed out the map you created, to know like the actual process and be able to explain it to them throughout the whole process and how it works, I think it's going to help me a little bit more. But I think I just came on here because I want to know, like, how do I reach to them? That like I might say it, but they're not really listening, I feel like. So something's missing for me, and I think I learned a lot today from that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Can I provide some advice on
Yeah,
that?
please.
We just did an event at Roosevelt High School, and we've been doing it I think we're going to do it at 48 high schools. And we did a junior assessment in preparation for next year, right?
Okay.
And again, when we're presenting, we went in there and looked at, okay, how many kids are above a 3.0? How many kids are above, a 2.8? In certain schools, we decided to go 2.5 and above, present to those kids together. And just in your presentation, you could say, with the 2.5 GPA, with, completing your A through G requirements,
Mhm.
you're guaranteed admissions to a four-year university, whether you're undocumented, documented, right? But bringing those kids together means so much.
Okay.
They get to see their friends there.
Yeah.
They get to see that you told them that they could be admitted, guaranteed, right? And in that process, you talk about financial aid, but it's very different. I think it's one of our best services that we provide to the schools, and we see drastic changes. In the last 2 years, we haven't been able to do this.
Yeah. COVID.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, the last 2 years. So
Yeah.
we've seen a humongous difference in results because of that. And we've tried doing it in other ways, but nothing beats bringing in the kids together.
Yeah.
So I'm presenting to a school next week to kids above a 2.2 because the principal wanted that.
Okay.
2.2 and above,
Yeah.
right? But to try to convince them that they need to understand this,
Mhm.
that they need to understand that there's financial aid. And I know that all of us are saying, yes, we do this,
Mhm.
right? We do say it. But it comes across a little different for some reason. I do different things. I do different strategies, especially for the ones that are close to the 3.0.
Yeah.
When I highlight their transcripts, in LAUSD, there's a financial aid GPA in there.
Mm.
And one of the things that I did when LAUSD told me to help them out in their A through G completion, I said, I'll help you if you put something in the transcript,
Mhm.
in every student's transcript, financial aid GPA. Because I wanted to know, I want the student to know if they're below a 3.0, right? Because then they qualify for a Cal Grant A. And I want the counselor to know that they're a 2.9 and they just have to do something just a little bit,
Minor.
bump up. So there's programs that are being built to support those kids that are on the edge, right? Right there, just barely missing it.
Okay.
So that you can pull them in and tell them about what they're going to lose. They're going to lose about $52,000.
Yeah, losing the money, those are great ideas, Ugo. I really appreciate that, getting individuals to come together. And also, I would just add to that, I think the digital divide is a really big problem in terms of students actually being able to fill out the applications. How can we bring people to a space where they could actually fill that out together? And I really love what you're saying about like guarantee into a four-year university, but I also would encourage us to think about how can we destigmatize going to a community college? Like, could they do the 2-year and then the 4-year? Like for those that can go to the 4-year, I think that's amazing and a great opportunity, but also making sure that students, like they could go to school and get the majority of their tuition paid at the CSU, the CCC, and the UC if they meet the Cal grants, but they also still have options beyond that. I think another area that's really important is just thinking about what are students going to do after college and how can we help try to promote this idea of entrepreneurship, and that even with or without DACA, individuals will have an ability to be able to use their degree. Because I think a lot of young people that are coming up now are just worried about what will they do with this degree? Maybe I should just go to work right now. I'm wondering, Rocio or Madeline, if there's anything that you would add to that piece, just in terms of encouraging, making sure that more individuals can continue their higher education.
Yes, I like how you highlighted that, Nancy, and I just want to touch on 2 points. So I just recently spoke with a parent, and this is usually what happens in the conversation, that the parent believes that the student cannot access state financial aid or the California Dream Act because they don't have DACA. And it's so great when the parent realizes, oh, it's 2 separate things, DACA and the California Dream Act. So that is one huge factor in like making sure that as much as we know it, and the conversation has been going on for years, still parents and students still think that the California Dream Act and DACA are the same thing. So just really explaining just from the get-go, you do not need DACA to be able to access state financial aid. There are 2 separate things. Now let's look at what it is that you need to be able to access state financial aid, and going through some of the information. Now there's this other layer where the student then begins to wonder, well then, okay, I can do this, But then what's going to be the point if I'm not going to be able to work because I don't have DACA, I don't have ads, I won't be able to get a job afterwards. So it's important to be able to connect students to information about entrepreneurship. And this is where I get to speak with folks about, hey, well, there are ways in which folks can generate income through entrepreneurship, independent of their immigration status, and things might change later down the line. Laws change, things happen, your situation might change later down the line. So let's do what's possible now up until things change. And if in the meantime, there are ways for you to be able to generate income. So I went ahead and I added the link on our entrepreneurship resources. It's a landing page on making money. And we truly believe that it is possible. Our organization is currently investing money for entrepreneurs. So it is something that is out there for students to be able to access.
Yeah, thank you,
Can I
Lucio,
add
super
something?
important. And I do hear someone, talking about just really students are sick of being in online classes, right? So I think that kind of goes back some of to Ugo's point. Is there a way for us to bring them together? Is there a way for us to talk about the opportunities that might be able to be for being on, not being in online classes on college? But I think that it's also important that we make sure that we bring students back. If we've lost a lot of enrollment, in these past couple of years, how can we make sure that we bring people back to the fold? So
Can I add something? Hello.
please.
Hi,
Hi.
I'm Mariel Duran. I work at Pittsburgh High School. I've worked closely with Immigrants Rising before, and they were physically at our school. I really appreciate the platform, all the work that you do. But I also wanted to touch a little bit on what Carolina and Hugo were talking about before, about the students and how to access them and have them come. Because I know for our undocumented students, they don't necessarily come to the College and Career Center or to get asked the resources and say, hey, I'm undocumented, how can you help me? Like, that's not how the conversations ever start. We talk about something else, whether it's the career that they want to do or whether we're talking college or talking options. And then somewhere in there, we end up going to the part of like financial aid. And normally our undocumented conversations, they don't start in 9th through 11th grade. They start senior year when it's that financial aid time, that FAFSA time. We're working on the application. And the first question is, do you have your social security number to create your FSA ID? And when they say no, our automatic follow-up question, okay, is it that you don't have it on you, you don't know it, or you don't have one even at home? Like we go through like all the options of this lacking the social security number. And sometimes the answer is I don't know. Sometimes the answer is like, I don't. And then you see them kind of back up like, should I share this information? And then it's like, because depending on your answer, there's different applications. And they're like, okay, I don't have one. So then that's kind of like where the conversation goes in and we dive deeper and we're like, and as soon as we get that information, like they're undocumented, okay, it's fine. We got this other application to do. These are going to be your options. And once they realize you know what you're talking about, you have that ability to like help them, that just opens the door. They come back, they get that support, like they know that you are someone who's a resource for them there. But I also wanted to mention that next year, FAFSA or the California Dream Act is going to be required like statewide. Like that's going to, our school started this year trying to see how are we going to do this as in our entire school. We have 3,500 students. We have about 800 seniors. We're like, how are we going to get all of these students to complete these applications? So we already started like calling them in for workshops. We started trying to make it happen this year. And especially like, I realized one of the things that really helps is having a lot of people in the room at the time you're doing these workshops. So we had our college and career team, we had our counselors on board. And so we would talk about the application. We'd have them sit down and start like that first question, let's create your FSA ID. Do you have a social? Is there anyone at home you can ask for it? And then have enough people in the room to walk around and have more of those slight small one-on-one conversations like, hey, you don't have it, like what's going on, and be able to start that conversation there as well. So just having more hands in the room, whether it's teachers, staff, counselors, that's going to be a big help in touching base with all of your students. Sorry, I realize I talked a lot, but
no, thank you. That's really important. And we didn't mention AB 469 today in the presentation, but it is true that this is the law that now all individuals are going to have to do their FAFSA and California Dream Act applications starting next year. I love that you guys are already kind of on the job in terms of trying to make that happen now. We will be providing more information as that goes through. Students will be able to opt out, but like how that information be shared, how will it be protected? Those are all questions that each of us, I think, are really important in answering. So I do want to I know that we've stayed a little bit over time. This is our contact information. We want to thank you so much, all of you, for coming here today. We definitely hope that you have filled out our evaluation if you haven't yet, especially if you think this is important. How could you give us some great feedback so that the next time that we do it, we can improve it, or also let our bosses know that you think that this is important, that we should continue doing this kind of information, to spread this kind of information out to educators across the state. You are the ones that are on those front lines. We appreciate you so much. We want to support you in every way that we can. And we are really focused right now on trying to do a train the trainer model. We used to go out to a bunch of different high schools and colleges specifically. We're now trying to be able to work with the educators that support undocumented students to get you the information that you need in your hands, be able to support the students that we all know is important to do. So thank you so much. I want to just leave Madeline and Rocio time to give thanks and your wrap up, and appreciate all of you today.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. Maybe this is something we can offer as a two-part or a longer session next time we do it, because I know there's a lot of questions that came up, and I'm hearing like a lot of folks strategies that it would have been great to share in smaller breakout rooms. But hopefully you all can take what you learned today and yeah, just make the pathway to college more known and visible for undocumented students. I think that was the thing that I would always suggest, like never close the door for students. Don't be that person that they tell years later when they've made it that this educator told me no and I wanted to prove them wrong, but always make sure that the door is open for them.
Thank you, Madeline.
Thank you everyone so much for joining us. And I mean, this is going to be like a little promotion. Follow us on Instagram. Tell your students to follow us on Instagram. That is one of the platforms that we're currently using to provide the most up-to-date and immediate information as things are updated and as things come out. So feel free to follow us on Instagram, and it's a great way to stay directly connected with us. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you to Uni. Thanks, Uni, for all that behind-the-scenes support that made this possible. Thanks to all of you. If you haven't completed the evaluation yet, please go ahead and do so. And we look forward to seeing you the next time. Thank you for helping your students, and we're sending you best wishes in all that you do.